The Medicis, the family that bankrolled the Renaissance. The Medicis were constantly reinventing themselves, from wool merchants to bankers to politicians to popes, and finally to royalty. All along nurturing and paying the bills of some of the greatest artistic and scientific minds of the Renaissance. Let's get to know the many prominent members of this Italian dynasty, uncover their scandals and numerous unsolved murders, and divulge their ultimate demise. Our story begins in the rolling hills and vineyards of Tuscany. Over the course of the Middle Ages, a family slowly grew to wealth and prominence. Their name, Medici, comes from the Italian for medical doctor. Some believe that their coat of arms represents 5 pills. Others claim it derives from their legendary founder, Ser Averardo, one of Charlemagne's knights, who bested a giant in a duel. Averardo's golden shield received 5 blows from the giant's blood-stained spiked mace. The family built their fortune importing wool from northern Europe, which was then woven into fine cloth by skilled Italian weavers and sold across Europe at great profit. Giovanni de Bicci was born in 1360. When he was 3, his father died, and the family fortune was divided among his 4 older brothers, leaving very little for him. However, his uncle had built a career as a banker, so teenage Giovanni moved to Florence to be his apprentice. Banking, in its basic form, lending goods or money with the understanding that it would be paid back, came into existence shortly after humans took up farming. Banks funded the expansion of the Roman Empire and the Silk Road to China. Charging interest made the risk that a loan would not be repaid worth it, and was standard practice in the ancient world. But in the Bible, Jesus drove usurers out, so the church considered it a sin. Christian bankers found creative ways to make a sin-free profit. They lent money to merchants in exchange for better prices on wool and other products, and they sold bills of exchange, the precursor to the checking account. For a fee, money could be deposited in one city in exchange for a promissory note, which would be redeemed for cash in another city. This prevented merchants from being robbed on their travels. In the 1400s, Italy was not a single nation, but a collection of city-states. The peninsula was a hub for transportation between Asia, Africa, and Europe. Trade brought vast fortunes to Italy, and someone needed to manage them. Giovanni came up with the ingenious double-entry bookkeeping system, in which debts and credits are recorded in separate columns. Though this may seem a bit dull to the non-accountants among us, if you recall the last time you opened your bank statement, you'll see that the double-entry system is still used today. Giovanni proved himself a brilliant young pencil pusher, and his uncle left the bank to him. He made a spectacular marriage to Piccarda Buri, daughter of an ancient noble family. The 18-year-old bride brought respectability, an impressive dowry, and her own beauty to the marriage. Giovanni was renowned for his ugliness, but his clever mind kept his wife and 4 children in luxury. He expanded the Medici Bank to Rome, Venice, and Naples. In 1397, he became the official banker to the Catholic Church. Giovanni had no interest in politics. He was a champion of the common people and disliked the aristocracy, who never accepted him. He showed them up by splashing his cash. He hired Brunelleschi to construct the Church of San Lorenzo and Donatello to create its sculptures. When he died, he left behind 180,000 gold florins, equivalent to over $1 billion today. His wealth and the bank went to his 2 sons, Cosimo and Lorenzo. Cosimo had inherited his father's shrewd mind. Lorenzo played second fiddle, but his descendants would later come out on top. Together, they expanded the bank to Pisa, Milan, Avignon, Bruges, Lubeck, and London. Cosimo was much more intrigued by politics. Florence was ruled by the Signoria, a council of 9 men elected every 2 months. This system was supposed to preserve democracy, but only the powerful men belonging to guilds could vote, and they all owed money to the Medicis. Cosimo used his leverage to ensure that the Signoria was always stacked with his allies. Pope Pius II said, "Political questions are settled in Cosimo's house. He is king in all but name. But behind every powerful man are a few dozen enemies pointing daggers." After he backed a failed conquest of Lucca, Cosimo was arrested and threatened with execution. He used favors owed him to slither out of the noose and escape to Venice. Lorenzo followed. The brothers built a library as a gift to the Venetian people. But when the Florentines realized the Medicis had taken all their money with them, they begged them to return. Cosimo made constitutional changes which ensured his power would not be questioned again. He commissioned Donatello's David and supported Brunelleschi's construction of the dome atop Florence Cathedral. He built and stocked the first public library in Florence, which became a center of the humanist movement. And he constructed the Palazzo Medici, which would be filled with spectacular art over the coming generations. Cosimo died at 74 and left the business to his son, Piero. He suffered from gout, which confined him to his bed. He was not as brilliant as his predecessors, but he was a decent steward and continued artistic patronages. His wife, Lucrezia, wrote several poems and plays of her own. Piero died of lung disease at 53, and his 20-year-old son, Lorenzo, took the reins. He was a bright child and benefited from an exceptional education. His bedridden father sent him on foreign missions from a young age, and he became a skilled diplomat. He wed Clarice Orsini, and they grew to love one another. Lorenzo was considered short and unattractive, with a squashed nose, harsh voice, and unfashionable dark complexion, while his younger brother, Giuliano, was a golden boy and modeled for Botticelli in his painting of Mars and Venus. Giuliano allegedly had an affair with famed beauty Simonetta Vespucci, Botticelli's greatest muse, and model for Primavera and the Birth of Venus. While riding in a joust, Giuliano carried a banner of Simonetta as Athena. He won and nominated her as the Queen of Beauty. But this was all part of the courtly love of the time and doesn't mean they were banging. Simonetta died 1 year later at 24. Tuberculosis was long suspected, but modern art historians now see signs of pituitary adenoma, or excessive growth hormone secretion, in her portraits, which may have been her actual cause of death. She was carried through the city in an open coffin for all to admire. Whether or not Giuliano was involved with Simonetta, he was a popular guy. He definitely had an affair with Fioretta Giorini. Members of the Pazzi family cooked up a scheme to get the Medicis out of power. Pope Sixtus IV wrote to them that he could not officially sanction murder, but it would be quite convenient if some tragic accident were to befall Lorenzo and Giuliano. The Pazzis tried to ambush them on the road, but the brothers eluded them. They made another attempt in Rome, but failed. Next, the Pazzis set to strike at a banquet at the Medici villa, but Giuliano fell ill and did not attend. Frustrated, the Pazzis made a game-time decision to attack during Mass at Florence Cathedral. Giuliano was stabbed 19 times and bled to death on the floor at 24. Lorenzo was wounded in the neck, but was saved by his entourage. Shortly after Giuliano's death, Fioretta gave birth to their son, Giulio. She died within a year, and the child was raised by his uncle. The people were outraged by the attack on their leading citizens, and members of the Pazzi family were lynched. Pope Sixtus was furious, but Lorenzo made peace with him by paying for frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. His numerous artistic patronages earned him the moniker Lorenzo the Magnificent. Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and many other great minds lived and studied at the palazzo and joined the family for dinner. Lorenzo was famed for throwing elaborate, flamboyant parties and festivals, but while he was living the high life, several branches of the bank collapsed. King Edward IV of England requested massive loans to finance the Wars of the Roses. The Medicis knew he was a bad bet, but they needed English wool to maintain their substantial textile interests. Unsurprisingly, Edward couldn't pay back the cash, and the London branch went bankrupt. After 3 generations of wealth and political power, the Medicis were beginning to lose the former and rely more on the latter. Though Florence was technically still a republic, they were its de facto monarchy. But as any dynasty eventually finds out, the brilliance of the founders doesn't always trickle down. Eldest son Piero was tapped as heir, but he was arrogant, undisciplined, and unsuited. He was tutored by famed scholar Poliziano. Some years later, student and teacher had a falling out, and Poliziano and his probable lover, Pico della Mirandola, woke up dead. Poison was confirmed in 2008 when their bones were exhumed and tested for arsenic. Piero is the #1 suspect. He was also constantly at odds with his older cousins, Lorenzo and Giovanni, but they survived. King Charles VIII of France crossed the Alps to claim Naples from the Spanish. He asked for Piero's support, but when he refused, the French attacked. Piero couldn't get the Florentine nobles on his side, so without government approval, he surrendered to Charles. Florence was outraged. The Medicis were forced to flee while a mob looted their palazzo. They made it to Venice and sold family jewels to support themselves. Humiliated, Piero tried to regain his family's position, but he could not win back Florence. While fleeing a lost battle, he drowned in the river. The 31-year-old would be remembered as Piero the Unfortunate. Second son Giovanni was made a cardinal at 13. He proved more talented at politicking than his brother and made powerful allies in the church. He was elected Pope Leo X at 37. He set to work restoring his younger brother, Giuliano, to power in Florence. The Pope made peace with Francois I of France and wed his brother to Filiberta of Savoy. Giuliano was being groomed for the throne of Naples when he died at 37. Pope Leo drained the papal coffers to win his nephew Lorenzo the title Duke of Urbino. Though his funds were low, he had the Medici drive to sponsor great works. His pet project was the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica, so he started selling indulgences. For a donation, you could absolve yourself of sin and be released from purgatory after death. German priest Martin Luther railed against this practice in his 95 Theses. Leo responded by excommunicating him, but it was too late. The Protestant movement was up and running. Pope Leo died suddenly of pneumonia at 45. Unfortunately, noble women of the time didn't have much space to be more than supporting characters in their male relative stories. Still, the Medici women should not be forgotten. Lucrezia was married at 18 and gave birth to 11 children. When her brothers were exiled, she funded a plot to return Piero to power. The scheme failed, and Lucrezia was spared from execution only because she was a woman. When Giuliano was returned to power, he consulted his sister. When Leo was elected pope, Lucrezia held days of celebration and gave money to the crowds outside the family palazzo. Pope Leo pawned the papal tiara to Lucrezia, and she was at his side when he died. She constructed several convents and lived to the age of 83. Maddalena was married at 14 to Pope Innocent VIII's illegitimate son. This alliance secured her brother's cardinalship. She purchased and renovated a thermal bath resort, had 8 children, and died at 57. Luisa and Contessina were also models for Botticelli. Piero's only son, Lorenzo II, became Lord of Florence when his uncle died. He grew bored of the restrictions of ruling a republic, so he talked his uncle into lending him an army to conquer Urbino. The newly minted duke married French noblewoman Madeleine de la Tour, and they had one child, Catherine. He contracted syphilis and died just 3 weeks after her birth. Madeleine died as well, either of plague or syphilis, leaving baby Catherine orphaned. She did have a 9-year-old illegitimate half-brother, Alessandro, and luckily their cousin was elected Pope Clement VII. The illegitimate son of Giuliano had inherited a nearly bankrupt church, which was rupturing amid the Protestant Reformation, but the Pope was single-minded in his quest to restore his family's greatness. He named Alessandro and his cousin Ippolito co-lords of Florence. The teenagers hated each other and feuded constantly. After 4 years, they were overthrown by Republicans. They fled, but forgot little Catherine, who was held prisoner in a convent. Pope Clement was caught between the two most powerful monarchs, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and King Francois I of France. He initially sided with Francois, but the emperor responded by sending troops to threaten Rome. The unpaid soldiers mutinied and sacked the city, looting and murdering thousands. Clement was held prisoner and forced to ally with the emperor. Henry VIII of England picked this inconvenient time to ask for an annulment of his 18-year marriage to Catherine of Aragon. She was the emperor's aunt, and the Pope couldn't very well insult his captor's family. Clement denied Henry's petition, infuriating him and leading him to break with the church. Clement lost England, but with the emperor's help, he retook Florence for his family. Alessandro was put back in charge with the indisputable title Duke of Florence. The Medicis were now officially a hereditary monarchy. As a consolation prize, Ippolito was made a cardinal. He bitterly vowed revenge, but ended up dead at 24, probably on his cousin's orders. Alessandro's rule was controversial. Many admired his common sense, justice, and championship of the poor. But those he had displaced spread rumors that his mother had been an enslaved Moorish woman. He did have unfashionably tan skin. He wed the emperor's illegitimate daughter, Margaret. She was only 14 and already in a romantic relationship with a woman, so they had no children. On the night of Epiphany, Alessandro was invited for a tryst with a beautiful widow. As he waited for his lover, alone and unarmed, he was attacked by another cousin, Lorenzino. Alessandro fought fiercely and bit off one of Lorenzino's fingers, but he died of his wounds at 26. The cousin had committed this gruesome betrayal, hoping to inspire a Republican uprising. When officials discovered the Duke's body, they feared the same. They carried him out of the palazzo, rolled up in a carpet, buried him hurriedly in the cemetery, and quietly replaced him. Lorenzino was quietly murdered. Pope Clement commissioned art by Raphael, Cellini, and Michelangelo, including the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. He also approved Copernicus's theory that the Earth revolves around the Sun, 99 years before Galileo was tried for heresy for the same idea. Clement also elevated the Medici family to the ranks of royalty by arranging a marriage between 14-year-old Catherine and Henri, the second son of King Francois I of France. I have 2 videos going into greater detail on Catherine's fascinating life, but here's the short version. After the death of her brother-in-law, she became Queen of France. Her husband, Henri II, died after a jousting match when shards of the lance impaled him through the eye. Catherine was the power behind the throne as her 3 sons, Francois II, Charles IX, and Henri III, became kings and then died young. Her eldest daughter, Elizabeth, became Philippe II of Spain's 3rd wife, but died in childbirth at 22. Catherine arranged the marriage of her 3rd daughter, Margaret, to Henri, King of Navarre, in an attempt to forge peace between warring Catholics and Protestants. But during the celebrations, violence broke out and over 5,000 Protestants were murdered. Catherine was not at fault, but her foreignness and gender meant the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre became a black mark on her reputation. She died at 69 after 30 years in power. As all her sons died childless, the French throne went next to her son-in-law, Henri IV. This meant Catherine's daughter, Margaret, was queen. but she never got to enjoy it as she had already been exiled for favoring her Catholic relatives over her husband. After 18 years of childless and miserable marriage, Margaret consented to an annulment. The exes finally made peace, and Margaret was welcomed back at the French court, where she was a patron of the arts and a trendsetter. Henri had burned through a great deal of money to win the wars of religion and gain the throne, money he borrowed from the Medici Bank. So he chose as his second bride a member of the now in power cadet branch of the family. Before we meet Marie, let's rewind to get to know her side of the family. Cosimo's line wasn't completely out of steam yet. In 1605, Leo XI was elected pope at the age of 70. During his coronation, he caught a chill. He died 27 days later, ending one of the shortest papal reigns in history. Pier Francesco left his young sons Lorenzo and Giovanni orphaned. They were taken in by Lorenzo the Magnificent. He plundered their inheritance, but ensured them an excellent education. They were tutored alongside Amerigo Vespucci. Years later, he wrote letters from the New World to Lorenzo, which were published in a popular book of maps, thus leading North and South America to be named after Amerigo. Lorenzo was a bright star and was the Magnificent's intellectual and artistic heir. The elder Lorenzo commissioned Botticelli's Allegory of Spring for the younger's wedding. The younger personally commissioned The Birth of Venus. But the Magnificent still favored his own incompetent son, Piero, and both father and son blocked the Pier Francesco brothers from politics, leading to a bitter rivalry. When Charles VIII of France ousted Piero, Lorenzo and Giovanni returned to Florence and were hailed by Republicans as Popolano, champions of the people. Both brothers died in their 30s, but managed to marry and have children. Younger brother Giovanni's bloodline came out on top. He had wed Caterina Sforza, one of the most remarkable women of the Renaissance, who personally ruled Forli and Imola with an iron fist. Their son, Ludovico, committed his first murder at 12 and was banished from Florence. He formed a band of dreaded mercenaries and was hired by both of his papal cousins to defeat their enemies. He married his third cousin, Maria Salviati, and they had a son. During a battle, Ludovico was shot in the leg. The limb was amputated, but he died of gangrene 5 days later. When Alessandro was assassinated, Maria used all her influence to ensure that her 17-year-old son, Cosimo, was elected Duke of Florence. Many assumed that he would be naive and easy to manipulate. Cosimo surprised them with his cunning and strong will. He defeated an army of dissidents and allied with Emperor Charles V against the French and his cousin Catherine in the Italian Wars. With the emperor behind him, he laid siege to Siena. When their population was reduced from 40,000 to 8,000, they surrendered, and Cosimo was elevated to Grand Duke of Tuscany. He constructed Pitti Palace and fantastic gardens at Villa de Costello. These impressive settings announced a new golden age for the Medici family. He wed Spanish aristocrat Eleanor de Toledo, and they had a happy and unusual for the time, faithful marriage and 11 children. She advised him and ruled as regent in his absence. But at 40, Eleanor and 2 of her sons died from malaria. Heartbroken, Cosimo retreated to Villa de Costello and handed the government to his eldest son, Francesco I. Among his generation were 5 mysterious deaths and murders. Youngest brother Pietro married his first cousin, Eleonora de Toledo. She was close with her cousin Isabella, but both had unhappy marriages and took lovers. When Pietro discovered Eleonora's affair, he strangled her with a dog leash. 1 week later, Isabella also fell dead, officially while she was washing her hair, though it is likely that her husband strangled her as well. The Duke condoned the murders of his sister and sister-in-law, and neither of their husbands faced justice. After these horrific events, other unexplained deaths of women in the Medici household were suspected of foul play. Years earlier, eldest daughter Maria died suddenly at 17 before her wedding to the Duke of Ferrara. According to rumor, her father caught her with a lever and stabbed her in the heart, but she more likely died of malaria. The Duke still needed a bride, so 14-year-old Lucrezia was sent down the aisle. She was already suffering tuberculosis, but when she died, many assumed it was poison. Duke Francesco wed Joanna of Austria, daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor. They had an unhappy union. While heavily pregnant with her 8th child, she fell down the stairs. She went into premature labor, and both she and the child died. Francesco quickly married his mistress, Bianca, and many accused the couple of murdering Joanna. But nothing was ever proven. Only 3 of her children survived to adulthood. The youngest, Marie, was wed to King Henri IV of France when she was 25 and he 47. She will warrant a dedicated Queens of the World episode in the future. But the short version of her tumultuous life is that she thrilled the childless king by promptly delivering 6 children. They made illustrious marriages. Elizabeth became Queen of Spain and Henrietta Queen of England. Henri was assassinated by a Catholic zealot, and Marie became regent for their 8-year-old son, Louis XIII. As he entered adulthood, his mother refused to hand over power. The frustrated king finally locked her up, but she escaped by climbing out a window with a rope ladder. For over a decade, Marie struggled with her son, but the man she had created, Cardinal Richelieu, gained influence over the king and finally got the Queen Mother accused of treason and banished. Her daughter Henrietta reluctantly housed her in London, but when the English Civil War ousted Charles I, Marie moved to Cologne, where she was taken in by artist Peter Paul Rubens. The mother of a king and 2 queens died alone and impoverished at 67. When Francesco I died without a male heir, his younger brother, Ferdinando, left his position as a cardinal, took the throne, and married. Under his just leadership, Tuscany and the Medici Bank prospered. He hired famed astronomer Galileo Galilei to tutor his sons, and he named the 4 moons of Jupiter after the boys. Cosimo II suffered from ill health and allowed his ministers to run things. He had 8 children before he died of tuberculosis at 30. Ferdinando II became Grand Duke at 10. He was wed to his cousin, Vittoria della Rovere, and they had 4 children before she caught him in bed with a count and they separated. Ferdinando loved science and invested in innovative projects, but the Medici's many patronages had been outpacing their income for generations, and they were on a gradual decline. After 50 years on the throne, Ferdinando died of dropsy at 59, and Cosimo III took over. He was terribly mismatched with his cousin and wife, Marguerite d'Orléans. She was a libertine, and he was gay and morally rigid. They had 3 children, but after several attempts to annul their marriage, Marguerite left her husband. During his record-breaking 53-year reign, Cosimo enforced morality on Tuscany. Sex workers were punished, Jews were persecuted, wild May festivals became sober, and offenders were publicly executed. All 3 of his children had unhappy marriages and no offspring. Cosimo III died at 81, and his 52-year-old son, Gian Gastone, took the throne. He reversed many of his father's conservative policies, but he spent his final years wallowing in bed, sick in the knowledge that he would be the last Medici to rule Tuscany after 300 years in power. He died in 1737, age 66. Though the Tuscan throne went to the new Holy Roman Emperor Francis I, Anna Maria Luisa de Medici inherited the incomparable art collection acquired over 12 generations. She gifted it all to Florence, with the proviso that the collection never be removed from the city. Thus, she ensured that the legacy of the Medici family can be enjoyed by 16 million visitors a year and will never be forgotten. There are still living members of the Medici family. Prince Lorenzo is the current head of the House of Medici, though I was not able to find reliable information about which 17th century branch of the family he descends from. The prince was critical of his family's portrayal in the 2016 drama Medici. He engages in a number of business and artistic endeavors, including being a reality TV personality. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.